Hi, I'm Keith Reed with Reactor Retail. We serve fueling and charging retailers, wholesale marketers, and commercial fuel buyers. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe buttons and ring the bell to help the channel grow. We have with us today John Eichberger. He's the Executive Director at the Transportation Institute. John, how are you doing?
Doing great, Keith. Good to see you again.
Yeah, and John, for anybody that doesn't know, tell us a little bit about Transportation Energy Institute, or TEI.
Yeah, so TEI has been around about 13 years. We are a nonprofit, non-advocacy research group. We look at all factors that move vehicles on the road. So our board is comprised of a complete representation of the value chain, major oil companies down to EV charging companies, biofuel companies, retailers, distributors, equipment manufacturers, national lab engineers. We've got the American Lung Association, NASCAR. So if you think about it, if somebody is involved in producing energy or using energy, we have them at the table to make sure that we are answering questions the market has in a very objective and fact-based way.
And you're not an advocacy group or anything like that.
We do not lobby at all. That's why we're able to have oil companies and EV companies and ethanol companies sit at the table and get along, because we don't advocate.
You know, I know you guys produce an awful lot of reports. In fact, it's almost like you're cranking out one every 2 months. And I have to say that not only is the volume high, but the quality is universally high as well.
Well, the second one is most important. We want the quality to be good. So I'm glad to hear that.
And I've gotten insight out of them, you know, again, ever since you guys began. Your most recent one, Driving Insights, a 5-year synthesis of combustion emission research. Now, in that one, you basically took 9 of your previous critical sector type reports and published, you know, that you've published since 2020. And you did a full analysis of that combination of reports to draw out, you know, some core insights. You know, what prompted you to take this approach?
You know, it's funny. We do these research papers and they all stand alone. They're all independent reports, but many of them are derivative of findings from a previous report. And when I do my presentations, I pull from all these to create a narrative. And we were thinking, and we've done all this work on combustion engine emissions. We need to provide a compendium, a compilation of what we found, because it's what we do in our presentations, but we need something people can turn to as kind of a Cliff's Notes version of what we found. And so we pulled them together. We actually ran them through AI. AI organized the paper for us and found the key themes, which is awesome. And then we had to go through and fix AI, because AI likes to make stuff up. There were a lot of quotations in there that were supposedly from our reports that just did not exist. So I went through, we completely rewrote it. Then we threw it through the board for peer review to make sure we hadn't missed anything. And what's really cool is over the 5 years of the 9 papers, there were very specific themes that came through consistently. Even though some of the papers were very different focus, the message, the findings written by different organizations, different consulting groups or internally, when you're talking about combustion engines, certain things are true. And what we found is through those 9 papers, the truth actually did bubble up to the top, which was really cool.
And I believe you broke it down into 6 specific themes. And let's briefly touch on each of those themes. The first one is a life cycle evaluation of emissions.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Look, you know, if the goal is to reduce emissions, you can't just remove a tailpipe, because even electric vehicles without a tailpipe have emissions. We did a life cycle comparative analysis a few years ago, which is part of this summary. And we found that, yes, EVs have a lower from birth to death emissions than a combustion vehicle, but it's not 100% lower. It's about 40% lower, depending on your grid infrastructure. But if we really want to have an impact on air quality or carbon emissions or climate change, whatever your motivation is, we have to look at every part of the life cycle where the emissions happen, and then focus our attention on where we can have the best emissions reduction for the lowest cost. Because ultimately, if it's going to be too expensive, it's not going to work. And so the only way you can do it is you got to look at, okay, what are the emissions when we're drilling for oil, refining it into gasoline? What are the emissions when we're planting corn and biorefining that into ethanol? What are the emissions when we're harvesting cobalt to produce batteries for an electric vehicle? All those things. Then you have to look at, okay, what about when we're using the energy in the vehicles? What are the emissions there? And then when the energy's gone and the vehicle's done, what about the disposal? You have to look at all those components because they all contribute to an environmental impact. And if our goal is to reduce environmental impact, find out where we have the biggest benefit at the best cost, and we can accelerate our environmental improvement. So that life cycle is so critical to everything we're doing.
And life cycle can be a bit contentious at times because there have been different approaches to it. Obviously, I would imagine certain sides favor certain approaches over others. And
Right.
as you point out, when you start looking at contributing factors, that can be a really deep dive.
It can, but you know what? If we really want to have an impact on the environment, there's no shortcuts because we have to balance energy availability, energy affordability, vehicle affordability with our environmental footprint. And it's when we get those elements out of balance that we start making mistakes. And so, yeah, it is complicated. There's a lot more work to it. But ultimately, if we do it right, we'll find solutions that fit, that work for the environment, that work for our economics, that work for consumers. And that's really what we're trying to promote here through this type of research.
John, thanks for being on. I know you got a bit of a cold right now, and I just
Always.
got over about 6 weeks worth myself. So I know you're suffering through it a bit.
Yeah, I'm trying not to cough, but it's one of those things that sometimes I can't stop.
No problem. Theme 2 is technology diversity. It's a technology with vehicle use cases. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this really started when we were looking at the medium heavy duty vehicle segment, the commercial vehicle segment. We have some policymakers think that, well, if we electrified passenger vehicles, we can electrify all vehicles. And it really got us thinking, no, not all vehicles are created equal. A Class 8 long haul refrigerated cabin truck is not the same as a small passenger vehicle. And so you need to be looking at what are the vehicles being used for? How are they being used? Who is using them? In what environment are they using them? What are the ancillary energy needs of the vehicle? And so if we do that, and again, it makes it harder, more challenging, but if we look at the duty cycle and the end use case, then we can customize solutions. It may be you can electrify passenger vehicles. You can electrify a delivery van dropping off your Amazon package. But to take that long haul refrigerated truck, maybe we need to use renewable diesel or we need to use renewable natural gas. There are different solutions for different uses, and we have to take a look at those very specifically to find the right options that are going to make sense for the environment and the market.
I couldn't agree with you more. You know, if you look even at the general consumer public, there's going to be folks in there that love EVs and will make cultural and behavioral shifts to support them. There's going to be consumers that want the experience you currently have with liquid fuels, the convenience you can have on long trips. And as you state, when you move into the heavier vehicles, it's not just a behavioral concern that comes to mind, but you also have some real physical, technical infrastructure issues that come into place when you're talking about charging a Class 8 truck. You know, it's
right.
Theme 3 is environmental social governance, ESG, and policy alignment. What's going on with that?
So, you know, ESG's kind of come out of favor in the United States, but it's still really big globally. It's the environment, social governance. We focus on the environment side, but it really comes down to this. Policy is really the number one thing influencing market development. Policy priorities, we need to see how they interact with business priorities. Because even though we're not really talking about ESG very much in the United States, businesses are still committed to reducing emissions. They have these long-term plans, and businesses want their business partners to be participants in that plan. So if you're in a large multinational corporation and you have a net zero carbon goal for 2050, you need those delivering products to you and delivering your products to your customers to participate. And so that really looks at how do we take corporate business priorities, and how do they fit into the policy landscape? If they don't fit, we're going to have a real hard time finding solutions that make sense and are long-term sustainable. And so we really need to be thinking about the jigsaw puzzle of policy and business priorities and business execution. If they work together, and if we're building policies that are reflective of what businesses and the market wants, we're going to be a lot more successful. When they compete, we're in big trouble.
Absolutely. The next theme is fuels and engines and the decarbonization of existing fleets. And this is something, you kind of opened my eyes on, and before I let you actually explain it and maybe see I'm totally off base here, but you kind of opened my idea. You start thinking about all this stuff, you think it's going to be flicking a switch, and
right.
You've educated me and with the awareness that there is no flick the switch and the light goes on type of approach. And so tell us a little bit about that.
There are 1.5 billion combustion vehicles in the world. And the statement I always do in my presentations, if you think we're facing a climate crisis and that we can save the world by replacing 1.5 billion vehicles, you've already given up. It takes way too long. I've done the fleet transition analysis in the United States, and it is a multi-decades process to get anything ubiquitous in the transportation space. In the United States, there's 300 million vehicles in operation. We sell 15 to 16 million light-duty vehicles a year. We retire, about 5% of the fleet every year. But to turn it over is going to take a very long time. And so this is really saying, yes, new technologies are exciting. Electric vehicles are exciting. Hydrogen vehicles are exciting. And they have a role. They have a place. But if we really want to be serious about the environmental impact of transportation, we have to deal with the legacy fleet. We have to deal with combustion vehicles and the fuels that power them. And the best way, and really the only way to reduce the environmental impact of those vehicles is to affect the fuel. Now, there was a time when the country was all EV all the time, and anybody who wanted to talk about fuels was not welcome in the room. Talk about a colossal waste of time and a waste of resources. We need smart people finding solutions. We need low carbon fuels, we need more efficient combustion vehicles, and we need new technology vehicles. We need it all. And so that theme is really this: you cannot cut your nose off to spite your face. If you say we have to replace every vehicle in the world, fine. But what are we going to do with the vehicles that aren't being replaced yet? And we have to have a comprehensive approach to the market. Otherwise, we're just spinning our wheels.
And that is the thing. And our world standard of living, everything we see and do as a society, a global society, is tied into energy. And first of all, there's physical constraints. I think some of the pushes we've seen were seen as more aspirational than perhaps reality based.
Right.
And I think it's not just a case of whether you want something to happen or not. There's no practical, realistic way to actually, snap your fingers and make that happen. You just can't.
Right.
And if you try, my belief is if you try to make things too disruptive and too quick, you're going to potentially break some stuff that can have some really, really significant impacts on the quality of life for the people that are living in our world today, regardless of what you're doing for the world tomorrow. So,
and I used to hear this, John, we have to set these big goals in order to get there. The Apollo mission, that was critical. The whole country rallied around it, but we weren't removing anything. We were adding. And to your point, hope is not a strategy. Hope is not a plan. Yeah, we want hope. We need aspiration, but we need pragmatism too. I am, if nothing else, I'm a realist. I'm all for new technology. I'm all for new solutions. How are you going to get there?
Exactly.
And what are you going to, and while you're building that new thing, what are you doing to take care of what already exists? All that stuff. I mean, it's funny. I don't think it's rocket science, But it's amazing how many people don't get it.
Well, you mentioned the Apollo mission. I'll throw in there the Manhattan Project, and for that
Yeah,
matter, fighting World War II
right.
are perhaps a drop in the bucket compared to the complete decarbonization of society in a short period of time and replacing everything with the whole 9 yards.
Yep.
Again, whether it's a laudable goal, whatever your position might be, there are practical constraints as you move forward that must be considered. And again, that's really exactly what you guys do, is try to
Yep.
provide the guidance in those areas so people kind of understand the base realities involved with it across the board.
Yep. Since we don't advocate, we're not trying to push an agenda. Our goal, quite frankly, and I've been doing this my whole career, is
Yes.
okay, here's where you want to be. There's going to be hurdles between where you are and where you want to get. You have to identify those hurdles in order to overcome them. But the believers, the aspirational, the hopers, they don't want to hear about challenges.
Right.
There's a line in politics a lot say, don't ruin a good story with the facts. Well, if you don't know the facts, you're never gonna have the good story. So
Right, exactly. Well, here we have another theme: infrastructure and scalability
yeah,
constraints. Well,
it's great to have an idea, but can it make a difference?
right.
We've been talking about innovative fuel solutions for decades, and there's some that we affectionately refer to as is the fuel of the future, and it always will be. That
Like,
doesn't help us.
you
I mean, how are we going to? You have a new idea, great. Can we produce enough volume of that solution to make a difference?
right.
And it doesn't have to be, and that's where we run into this all or nothing idea. Some of the, well, we consume 140 billion gallons of gasoline a year. We need a 140 billion gallon alternative solution. No, a 2% alternative is still a good step in the right direction. But if we're talking hundredths of a percent volume, then we have issues. And if you can't get the raw materials you need to produce your product at scale, then we're kind of wasting our time. So we really need to look at, okay, it's a great idea. We've done this. We've looked at a couple products that are great ideas in concept. Can they be built to make a difference? Scalability, cost wise, can they be distributed? Can they be used by the legacy infrastructure in vehicles? And if the answer is no, then maybe we need to be sending our resources elsewhere. Doesn't mean we don't look at it, but we have to be realistic about what our options are.
John, the sixth theme is the economics of the total cost of ownership. I think that kind of is a self-explanatory.
I think it's come
Yeah,
through my
yeah,
conversation on the other five
yes,
too. I mean, look, when we started the Institute in 2013, I told everybody, I tell them all the time, sustainability is not an environmental term.
right,
It's been co-opted. Sustainability means something that's durable, can endure for a long period of time. If a solution is not economically sustainable, it will die. It will fail. Ultimately, the customer, the end user, needs to be economically taken care of. They need to be financially improved, or we're going to fail. And so everything we look at, every option that comes across our desk, we look at, okay, how much is that going to cost? And if it's going to cost a lot, okay, what are ways to offset that cost? Several years ago, I had a conversation with a couple of members of Congress who wanted to do a bill. And I laid them out. We'd done the analysis of what they were trying to achieve. And I said, it's going to cost consumers about 40 to 50 cents per gallon. And you're going to get a 2 to 3% gain in efficiency. The economics are tough here. And we spent about an hour saying, okay, how can we reverse that trend? How can we mitigate that cost impact? And ultimately, they couldn't figure it out and the bill didn't go anywhere. But that's what we do at TEI. That's our goal. Our goal is how do we help the market identify and deliver solutions that are economically sustainable? Because at the end of the day, customers vote with their wallet. They pick their options based upon what makes most financial sense, especially when it comes to vehicles and energy. And so that, life cycle is where you start if you're looking at emissions. But ultimately, if it's not cost effective, we got to find another solution.
It gets back to kind of saying everybody's green until the green in the wallet comes into play, and well,
Yep.
California seems to be an exception to that rule. I don't know, but
When the policymakers don't understand it,
yeah,
you get situations like we have in California.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, John, what would you say if you had to wrap it all up into kind of one solid takeaway for the audience? What might it be from the study here?
There are options to reduce emissions across the board. They're just going to take a little more effort. But we have tools, we have resources to have a meaningful impact on the environmental effect of transportation. We just have to be open to options. We have to be open to innovation. And if we are open to innovation and we look at our options through these 6 lenses, we're going to be able to weed out the bad ideas and really invest and support the good ideas. And that's why we did the papers, to remind our audiences that we can solve a lot of problems, but you have to think about the implications across multiple frameworks. Otherwise, you're going to turn a corner going really fast on your idea and slam into a wall. And we don't want that to happen. We want solutions to be sustainable. We want to move the industry. We want to move the market in the right direction. And that just requires a little more work up front and throughout. And hopefully, if we think about these 6 themes, we'll be able to find those options and those opportunities that maybe we didn't recognize before.
Absolutely. John, again, as I mentioned up front, I'm definitely a fanboy at TEI, and I'm not getting paid to say that. It's an honest assessment, and you have a lot of folks in your organization that are well known in the industry from all sectors. Why would a retailer or a marketer or a solution provider, why would they be interested in becoming a member of TEI, and what's involved with that?
So, all of our research is free to the public. But what the members of TEI get is they get to get in rooms or on calls with other stakeholders from different components of the industry. If you think about the composition of our membership, there is not one part of the value chain that's not at the table. And the reason that's important is businesses are always trying to know what's coming up, what's coming down the road. What do I need to be prepared for? And when you have everybody in the value chain, everybody occupies a different point of view, different perspective. And by combining those perspectives, you can see much more clearly what's around the corner. And our papers are designed to help with that, but there's nothing that replaces the conversation. The ability to sit in a room with an automaker, a refiner, a biofuel producer, an environmental advocate, a government person, and have a conversation about, okay, now what's happening here? What might be going on here? What should I be prepared for? That's what TEI provides. Our research is designed to help elevate knowledge, get people to think a little better, make decisions based upon information, not emotion. But the community within TEI is really the greatest diverse share group you can find. Because we don't advocate, our members are so open with their perspectives and their viewpoints. And it really is, every time I get together with them, I learn so much. And I see them going off in corners, 4 or 5 talking. And I go, wow, would you ever see them hanging out together? No. Because we go to conferences that are homogenous. TEI is not homogenous. People ask, do you get a lot of sponsorships? It's hard because our audience is not one industry. It is a whole bunch of industries. And that's what makes TEI special.
Exactly. Automakers, our industry members, get folks from EPA drop by sometimes to say what they can say about whatever's going on. And it's usually not much as one would expect, but I find the meetings to be very enlightening. And a lot of times it's not only are the presentations informative and pretty detailed, but it's the casual, as you pointed out, the casual conversations that go on outside, in between meeting breaks or at the receptions and such that, you get some really cool discussions going. So,
and we have a really good time.
Yes, you do. Yes, we do. I'm usually running back to my room to get some work done afterwards because, work never sleep. Yeah, I know. Again, John, thanks a lot for taking the time. I appreciate the discussion. And again, look forward to working with you guys as we move down the line.
Thanks, Keith. Anytime. I appreciate it. And glad Back to Retail is up and running.
Thanks.